My name is Eleanor Voss. I'm 58 years old, and for 50 years, someone has been writing to me from a place that doesn't exist yet. The first postcard came when I was 8, plain and signed, addressed to a street that wouldn't be built for decades. My mother laughed it off as a prank. I didn't. Because the handwriting on that card was mine. Not similar, mine, down to the shaky loop in my E. Every year since, on the same date, another one arrived. Warnings. Predictions. Things no stranger could know. My family called me obsessive. My husband called me unstable. But I kept every single card hidden because I knew something they didn't, proof that this was real, and it was building toward something. Before I tell you what actually happened, if you're new here, like this video, subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Now, let me take you back to when it all started. The first postcard came on a Tuesday in October. I was 8 years old, sitting on the porch steps, waiting for my father to come home from work. The mailman handed it straight to me. No stamp, price marked. No return name. Just my name, my address, in ink that looked strange, old, but somehow familiar. I flipped it over. 3 lines. A street name I'd never heard of. A house number. And a single sentence, "You'll understand soon." I ran inside, waving it at my mother. She glanced at it, shrugged, tossed it on the counter. Someone's idea of a joke. But I couldn't stop staring at the handwriting. My hands started shaking before my brain caught up to why. I grabbed a school notebook, wrote my own name on the cover, and held it next to the postcard. Same slant. Same looping E. Same tiny gap between the L and the E. I was 8. I hadn't developed that handwriting yet. My mother saw my face and stopped smiling. "What is it?" she asked. I didn't answer. I just kept staring at an address that, according to every map in our house, did not exist. A year passed. I almost forgot about it, until the same October date came around again, and the mailman handed me another one. Same handwriting. Same missing stamp. This time it said, "The dog will get sick. Don't panic. He'll live." 3 weeks later, our dog Baxter stopped eating. My mother rushed him to the vet at midnight, crying the whole drive. He lived. I never told her about the postcard. I just added it to a shoebox under my bed, next to the first one. I noticed something else that time. The address on the back had shifted. Same street, but the house number was different, like the place itself was still being decided. I asked my father about it at dinner. He barely looked up from his plate. "Kids send prank mail, Ellie. Forget it." My mother nodded, already changing the subject. But I couldn't forget it. I started checking the mailbox early every October, heart pounding before I even touched the metal door. By age 10, I had 3 postcards hidden in that shoebox, and a growing certainty that no one else could see what I saw, that these weren't pranks. They were promises. The postcards kept coming. Every October, without fail. By 12, I had 5 in the box. By 15, 8. Most were small, a rained-out school trip, a broken arm before it happened, a test question answered days in advance. I stopped telling anyone. I just watched and waited and wrote down every prediction that came true in a separate notebook I hid inside my mattress. Then came the one at 16. It didn't mention me. It named my uncle. 2 lines, "He won't make it past March. Say goodbye while you can." I didn't sleep for a week. I almost showed my mother almost. Instead, I watched my uncle at Christmas, healthy, laughing, no idea what I knew. In March, he collapsed at work. Heart attack. Gone before the ambulance arrived. I sat in my room that night holding the postcard, hands cold, staring at handwriting that was still, impossibly mine. I tried once to trace where they came from, no postmark, no stamp, no return address, nothing a mail carrier could explain. The post office had no record of delivery. Nobody could tell me how these cards were arriving. Only that they always did. At 19, the postcard changed. It wasn't vague anymore. It said, "Don't get in Daniel's car on the 14th. Take the bus." Daniel was my boyfriend. Reliable. Careful driver. I almost laughed reading it, almost threw it away like nothing. But I kept it in my coat pocket instead, folded small, telling myself it meant nothing. The 14th came. Daniel called, said he'd pick me up for dinner like always. My hand hovered over the phone. I thought about every postcard that had ever come true: Baxter, the test, my uncle. I told him I'd take the bus instead. He laughed, said I was being strange, hung up annoyed. 20 minutes later, my mother's phone rang. Daniel's car had been hit head-on at the exact intersection we always crossed. He survived barely. Broken ribs, a shattered leg, 3 surgeries. I sat in the hospital waiting room, postcard still folded in my pocket, and for the first time I wasn't just curious anymore. I was afraid. Because if I hadn't listened this time, I understood someone somewhere wasn't just watching my life. They were steering it. I couldn't just wait for October anymore. I started digging. Library records, city archives, old zoning maps, anything with that street name on it. Nothing existed. Not in any registry, not on any map printed before that year. But newer maps, city planning drafts from the following decade, showed it clearly: a road being proposed, not yet built. I drove out to where it should have been. Empty land. Weeds, a rusted fence, a faded "for future development" sign half buried in dirt. I stood there for an hour, staring at nothing, waiting for something to make sense. An old man walking his dog stopped beside me. "You're not the first person I've seen standing here like that," he said. I turned fast. "What do you mean?" He shrugged, said people came sometimes, stared at the empty lot, then left without explaining. Said the land had been fought over for years, buyers backing out last minute, deals collapsing for no clear reason. Like something didn't want it built, he said, and walked off before I could ask another question. I stood there long after he left, staring at that empty lot like it was staring back. 2 years later, I met Priya at a support group I never expected to attend, for people convinced something impossible was happening to them. I almost walked out the first night. Then a woman near the back said the words "future address," and I froze. Priya found me afterward in the parking lot. She'd been receiving letters, not postcards, since she was 12. Different handwriting, different city, same impossible truth, messages that knew things before they happened. "You're not the only one," she said. "There are others. Not many, but enough." She showed me a folder of clippings, people across 3 countries, decades apart, all describing communication from addresses that didn't exist yet. Some ignored, most terrified. A few, she said, had disappeared entirely, right around the time their final message arrived. My stomach dropped. "Final message?" She nodded slowly. "It always ends the same way, with an invitation." I thought about my shoebox, my notebook, 50 years of Octobers stretching ahead of me. For the first time, I understood this wasn't random, and it wasn't just happening to me. It was a pattern. And patterns have endings. The next postcard didn't warn me about anything external. It described a conversation I'd had that same week, word for word, one I'd had alone, in my car, talking to myself about leaving my husband. Nobody had heard that. Nobody could have. I sat in my kitchen holding it, hands trembling, checking the windows twice before locking every door in the house. If they knew that, what else did they know? 3 months later, another arrived. It named the exact date my father would die. I didn't sleep for 4 nights. I watched him at every visit, searching his face for signs, saying nothing. The date came. A phone call at 6 a.m. I already knew before I answered. At the funeral, I stood apart from everyone, postcard folded in my purse, grief tangled with something colder, the certainty that whoever was writing these wasn't just watching my life from a distance. They were inside it. Close enough to hear a private thought in a locked car. Close enough to know a death before doctors did. That night I asked myself a question I couldn't answer. Was this my future self warning me, or something wearing my handwriting? At 41, the empty lot changed. Construction fences went up overnight, no announcement, no permit signs I could find. I drove past it weekly, watching a foundation appear, then walls, then a roof. The house matched every description scattered across 50 years of postcards, down to the crooked chimney I'd sketched in my notebook as a teenager. I parked outside one afternoon and walked straight up to the site foreman. "Who owns this property?" He checked his clipboard, frowned, checked it again. "Records show it's already owned." Has been for years. He turned the clipboard toward me. My name. My signature. A date decades before I was born. My knees went weak. I gripped the fence to stay standing. That's not possible, I said. He shrugged, uninterested, said paperwork was paperwork, and walked back to the site. I stood there staring at a house built from my own future, owned under my own past, unable to explain either. That night, another postcard waited in my mailbox. No October date this time, no waiting for the pattern. Just 3 words, it's ready now. I hadn't touched the shoebox in months. I opened it with shaking hands. The next postcard gave a year. Not a warning this time, a deadline. Move by then, or the pattern breaks. I read it standing in my driveway, keys still in hand, groceries forgotten in the car. Move where? I already knew. That house. That address. 33 years of collecting proof, and now it wanted me to actually live inside it. I told my husband first. He laughed, then stopped laughing when he saw my face. You want us to move into a house some ghost mailed you directions to? I didn't have an answer that made sense out loud. We fought for weeks. He called Priya's group a cult. I called his disbelief willful blindness. Neither of us backed down. Then the next postcard came early, before its usual date, which had never happened in 42 years. It read, "He won't come." That's all right. You will. I didn't tell him about that one. I packed a single suitcase instead, sat on the edge of our bed, and stared at the deadline circled in my notebook. Somewhere, a version of me already knew what I was about to choose. I moved into the house alone on a Tuesday, same day of the week the first postcard ever arrived. The rooms matched every sketch in my old notebook, down to a window I'd drawn at 9 years old, one I couldn't have possibly seen. I unpacked slowly, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. Just silence and dust and October creeping closer again. When the postcard came that year, the tone had changed. No warnings. No predictions. Just, you're almost there. Thank you for listening. I sat on the porch steps, same position as that first day, 50 years earlier, and realized something. Every card, every warning, every impossible truth had been leading somewhere specific. Not danger. Not chaos. An ending. I started counting backward through the shoebox, 49 postcards laid across the kitchen table, dates lined up like a countdown I hadn't noticed until now. One was missing. The 50th. I checked the mailbox obsessively for weeks, October narrowing, that old porch step feeling creeping back into my chest, the same held breath from when I was 8, except this time, I understood exactly what I was waiting for. The 50th postcard didn't come by mail. I woke one morning to find it sitting on my kitchen table, no envelope, no stamp, no explanation for how it got inside a locked house. My hands shook picking it up. The handwriting looked older now, shakier, like whoever wrote it had aged 50 years exactly alongside me. It read, "Turn around." I didn't move for a full minute. Then I turned. Someone was standing in my doorway, silhouette lit from behind by the porch light, perfectly still. My breath caught. I gripped the edge of the table, every warning from 50 years flooding back at once. "Who are you?" My voice barely worked. The figure stepped forward into the light, and my whole body went cold, because the face looking back at me wasn't a stranger's. It wasn't even close to a stranger's. It was mine, older, tired, eyes red like they'd been crying for decades. She held up a postcard identical to the one in my hand. "I know this is a lot," she said quietly. "I remember standing exactly where you're standing." Behind her, the front door was still locked. She sat across from me at my own kitchen table, and for a long time neither of us spoke. Finally, she said it plainly. She wasn't a ghost, wasn't a copy, wasn't magic. She was me, decades ahead, from a version of this house that existed on the other side of something neither of us could fully explain. The postcards weren't predictions sent from nowhere. They were sent by her, backward, through a gap that only opened here, in this house, once it was finally built and finally lived in. Every warning, every death she'd named, every private thought she'd repeated back to me, she'd lived through all of it first, decades ago from where she stood, and she'd spent her whole life trying to soften what was coming. "Why the shoebox?" I asked. Why 50 years instead of just telling me everything at once? She said the gap could only carry small pieces, spaced apart, never enough to break what was supposed to happen, only enough to prepare me for it. I asked the question I'd been afraid to ask my entire life. What happens now that the postcards are finished? She looked at me, tired but calm, and said, "Now you write the next 50. Then she stood, walked toward the door, and was gone before I could take another breath. I sat alone at that table for hours, staring at an empty shoebox, understanding for the first time that the pattern hadn't ended. It had just changed hands.